Hey, I'm Cam, and today I'm going to be running through my class with you guys. It's called Safety in the Outdoors. I created this little curriculum recently. I normally teach it in person, but I wanted to make an online version of it. I actually decided to create this class. We had an unfortunate incident here in my area in southwest Colorado. We had a hunter who died about a month ago, something like that. And it was due to kind of some unfortunate and preventable circumstances. Basically, he was hunting in this area, like I said, about a month ago. It's pretty cold here. It's been getting very cold at night. He took off for his day hunt and he left pretty much all of his stuff at the truck for whatever reason. Why? I'm really not sure, to be honest with you. Those details haven't fully emerged yet, but he took off, he did his thing, went pretty far away from the vehicle, ended up getting turned around and lost, and ended up staying the night out there and died of hypothermia, which is quite unfortunate. So I decided to create this class to give some general information about ways that we can keep ourselves safe in the outdoors, whether that be a variety of activities, anywhere from hiking, biking, hunting, backpacking, kayaking, whatever it may be. I tried to kind of create this so that it could be tailored to a lot of those different activities, if that makes sense. So hope you enjoy. I'll try to keep this pretty much condensed as possible if I can. As far as myself goes, I consider myself to be pretty experienced in the outdoors. I've been chasing elk here in the southwest Colorado area for almost a decade now. I've yanked elk out of some of the nastiest terrain here in the country, on my back, of course. So spent a lot of time, multi-day trips in the backcountry, all off trail, all that fun stuff. Especially when the weather's even remotely nice, spring, summer, fall. I'm usually going out and doing something out in the woods. Usually probably three weekends out of 4. So I feel that I've got a pretty good amount of experience. There are definitely people out there who have more than me, but I think I've got at least a little bit here to share with you and relay. So hopefully you'll learn something here. So as we start here, the most important thing I would say that we could probably do is plan well and plan accordingly, right? So there's a few different questions. This is kind of how I laid out most of the presentation today. So there's a few different questions that I would encourage you to ask yourself before you get going on one of your excursions, right? So where are you going? Obviously that's very important. Who are you going with? That's going to definitely play a role, and we're going to get into that as well as why that's important. What's your level of experience? And not only what's your level of experience, but are you able to be honest with yourself, true to yourself, and kind of almost humble in a way so that you can, not get yourself in over your head and get yourself into an experience that might not pan out very well for you. What time of year is it? That's also very important, obviously, especially because of weather, right? As we get into those even shoulder seasons, especially here in Colorado, especially this time of year. As we get into the shoulder seasons with this high kind of altitude stuff, then we start to see weather and nasty stuff coming in that a lot of people are not prepared for or expecting. So that's something to definitely be aware of. How long will we be gone? Obviously that's very important. The longer that we're gone, generally the more provisions that we need, the more preparation it's going to take, the more time it's going to take. Gear, what kind of gear do you have? Do you have good gear? Do you have the appropriate stuff? That goes for both on your person and your vehicle, for the activity you're doing. If you're doing a multi-day rafting trip, do you have all the stuff that you need for that? Vehicle preparedness, that's also very important, right? If you get stranded out in the middle of nowhere, hopefully you don't, but if you do you have the tools and things to remedy that situation? Do you have other stuff in there for other emergencies? Do you have medical gear in there, right? And then of course, what if something does go wrong? If something does go wrong, what do we do? Are we prepared to handle that? Do we have some level of training, right? There's a lot of other questions that are going to come out of that as well. Okay, so back to our first question. Where are you going? So of course within that we have a few more questions that we might ask in that planning development stage. So how far is it? What's the elevation? That's going to matter, especially in places like where I live, places where there are mountains, right? Depending on what elevation it is where we're going, that's going to play a big role as far as the conditions, the weather, how much we might, if we're hiking or something like that, how much we might be going up and down. That's going to really matter, right? How are you going to access that location? That's also important, depending on if, if you're driving there, how far is it? What kind of roads are there? What are the roads like? Are they, you know, are the type of off-road that you really need a nice vehicle for that's prepared for that? And do you have that? If you're only able to access it via hiking or something like that, or maybe via canoe or raft, and then again, do you kind of have those amenities, and are you prepared for that? And then lastly, do you have maps? Maps are very important. For the love of God, I hope you have some version of it, whether it be an old school paper map, paper topo type map. There's nothing wrong with those. And if not, then having some sort of more modern GPS unit or an app like the one that I'm about to talk about on the next slide. That's also a great option. And then of course, also what's very important is, do you know how to read those maps, right? That's also a big deal. There's a surprising amount of people who don't know how to read topo maps. They don't know how to read topo lines. It's very simple. There's a lot of awesome content on that stuff out there already. I might make a video on that as well, but definitely make sure you educate yourself on how that stuff works and feel very comfortable using it. And if you don't, you know, always, if you can, see if you can find somebody who does know how to, who will go out with you, show you the works, show you how it all operates, and then kind of learn on the fly. That's what I've done a lot in my life. That's how I've learned a lot myself. Just kind of gone out and done it, gone out with other people who know their stuff, and kind of learned along the way through trial and tribulation, right? So as I said, this app is incredible. So this is called Onyx. It was originally developed for hunters, but they've kind of made a couple other versions for like hikers and backpackers. If you don't have this app, go get it right now. It's only like $25 a year for the version that covers the states you live in. I think it's like $100 a year if you get all 50 states. This is just the best app ever. So you get on your phone, and it is basically GPS satellite maps, but it has some awesome features. So if you notice here, like all this green, that's all national forest land. So you can set different layers and different settings on your map for what it will show you. So in this case, right, we can see that that's all national forest, that's all public land, and then we have these red lines, and then we have this stuff here that has like no background, and that means that that's public land, or private land. So the really cool thing is you can see where all those boundaries are. You know exactly where private versus public is, so you don't get yourself in any trouble, you know, trespassing, things like that. It shows you the roads. It has these little 2-track roads, so you can see what's unimproved generally versus roads like this, which would be more likely a paved road or a very well-maintained road, okay? It's got information on fires, all kinds of really cool stuff. And then also you can, one of the best parts about it, of course, it's going to track you and where you're going. It shows you via GPS coordinates where you actually are. And you can also set little markers and stuff like that. So if you find something cool in the woods, or you find a really cool camping spot, then you can mark that on your on your app there, and then it will be saved there for, you know, as long as you have that on your phone. So then you can always easily find your way back, cool stuff like that. So it's a really, really nice feature. Like I said, it has a tracker, so it can even follow you if you hike on a trail or off trail. It has a little tracker that you can start. It'll use a lot more battery, but it will show you the whole way that you've gone, which helps with not getting lost. And not only that, but it helps for other things like antler hunting. You can grid and see where you've gone versus where you haven't. And it gives you some other cool information about, you know, what elevation you gained, you know, how long the hike took, a lot of really cool stuff like that. So that app is absolutely phenomenal. I can't speak highly enough about it. All right, who are we going with? That was our next question, right? So this is another very important one for a couple different reasons, right? So we need to know who's with us, including ourselves, right? So we need to know, in general, what people's condition is like. Do they have any medical conditions that we know of? Do they have any issues that we need to be mindful of from a safety standpoint? We need to know what their experience level is, especially depending on what activity we're doing. If we're starting to do some stuff that's getting into some kind of gnarlier territory, then we need to be pretty well aware of what the people's experiences levels are that we're going with, so that we can, you know, cater to that to the extent that it's reasonable, right? And of course, we don't want to be pushing people too far out of their comfort zone, stuff like that. That's where we start to get into some kind of not cool territory, right? So for me, the years that I've spent in the backcountry, like I said, elk hunting, backpacking, going off trail, I have that accumulated experience where I feel very comfortable doing a multi-day trip in the backcountry here at 12,000 feet in Colorado in October, right? I mean, that's totally comfortable for me. And I don't need to, you know, have any help with anything as far as, you know, my pack list, what I'm bringing with me, how to set my tent up, my sleeping bag up, right? I know how to do all that stuff, and I feel very confident in it. So, you know, again, I don't really have that issue of where I kind of take it for granted, I guess, whereas some people who might not have that experience at all, it's easy for me to just think, oh, they'll be fine, right? But a lot of people don't have that experience, and that might be a really shocking, intense experience for them. And so that's something I need to be mindful of if I do end up having somebody join me on one of those excursions. And then, of course, right, group size. If you go some bigger groups, that's also an important thing to be able to keep track of people, especially kids, right? So that's another thing, just to make sure that everyone's accounted for, and ideally have some sort of system where we can keep track of people, okay, depending, again, on what our activity is. So what's your level of experience? So I kind of already was hinting on this right at the last one. So this is a really cool hike here in Colorado. I have not done this one yet. I would love to. This is an ascent to Capitol Peak, which is a 14,000 foot peak here in Colorado. So this is called the Knife Edge. It's a very, very exposed, pretty sketchy spot. Definitely got to have some confidence if you're going to be running that one. And I just chose that picture just again to kind of demonstrate. For me, I don't have a ton of mountaineering, rock climbing, scrambling experience. I have a little bit, but there's some people where this would be a cakewalk for them. For me, if I was to do this, it would definitely be pushing my comfort zone, right? So that's something that I would want to be aware of going into it. And not only that, but kind of almost continuously monitoring myself, and also being prepared too. If I got to the point where it was just not okay, then maybe I just need to swallow some pride and turn around and go back and either try it another time or work my way up, right? So I think it's a good thing to be humble, be honest with yourself, and not get in too over your head, if that makes sense. This was a picture I took of a couple buddies of mine a few years ago when we were hunting. So title of this slide is, what time of year is it? That's also obviously very important. Weather conditions are very important. As I discussed at the beginning of this presentation, the whole reason why I created this was because an older gentleman died in this area of hypothermia, right? So he stayed the night out in the woods when he was not expecting to. He didn't have the proper gear and things with him to accommodate for that, and unfortunately he succumbed to that because of that. So having the things that we need, even if we think we might not need them, is very important, right? So weather conditions are huge. Weather conditions here are very, very important to be aware of, and that comes with that experience, because when we start playing those big boy mountains, as I like to call them, when you start playing in mountains that have 12, 13, 14,000 foot peaks, they can create their own weather. You can leave your house and it might be 65 degrees, 70 degrees. And then when you get up in those woods, especially if you stay the night, it can rain on you, it can hail on you, it can sleet on you, it can snow on you, it can do a combination of all the above. I had that a little bit earlier this year in September. I was hiking up to do some scouting for my hunting trip this year, and I was just doing a one-nighter, so an overnighter with my buddy. And when we were hiking up that day of into our area that we were going to stay the night at, I was in a t-shirt. It was nice, it was comfortable. And then that night it rained on us, it hailed on us, it thunder snowed on us, and then we got about 7 inches of snow by the time it was that next morning, right? And all we had was a little tarp and some bivy sacks, which was fine for us. It worked out for us, but you know, again, maybe certain people wouldn't have been aware that that weather system might have been coming, or even would have been possible that time of year, right? In September, especially when you leave your house and it's so nice and bougie out. But it's important to be aware that those mountains have very different systems, okay? Road conditions, that's also very important, right? It's easy to get stuck when things are muddy and nasty and snowy and crappy. Again, depending on what you're getting yourselves into, do you have chains for your vehicle? Do you at least have four-wheel drive? Do you have some recovery tools? All that's going to be very important. And then, of course, as I keep saying, do you have the ability and understanding to use those tools, right? They're no good if you don't know how to use them. All right. How long will you be gone? That's also a big deal, right? So as I said, the more that we are gone, right, that means the more things we need, the more gear we need, the more planning we're gonna have to do, the more complicated things can get, and also the more potential we have for potentially getting into some trouble. So it's a big deal. Again, as you get more and more experience, you're gonna kind of become more comfortable with 3-day, 4-day, 5-day trips where it doesn't become as big a deal anymore, and you get your system down, you have all the things you need, blah, 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 right? I still sometimes forget things from time to time. It's good to make a list, but even then, sometimes I forget 1 or 2 things. It's usually not a super big deal, but I almost never have every single little thing that I want or that I need, but it's always better to have extra than not. And then another important point here on my slide is, and I think my camera's kind of having some goofy focusing issues, so I do apologize about that, is that you need to tell somebody where you're going, and that's an important thing. A neighbor, family member, somebody that you trust, tell them where you're going and try and give them a pretty specific, idea of where you'll be. That can really do wonders, especially if something bad happens, and something bad can happen to anyone. It can happen to anyone with any level of experience. So you at least have an idea where you're at, tell them where you're going, and then we have a better chance of potentially finding you, maybe recovering you, getting you out of a sticky situation if that ends up having to be necessary. So, all right, let's talk a little bit more about gear. So I chose this slide because that's how I feel when I talk about gear, because I'm a total gear whore, as it were. I love gear. I love having awesome things, going out, testing it out, whether it's clothing, layering systems, or it's new boots, or whatever it is, new tent system. I love it. It's awesome. I love putting it all to the test. It's really fun. So, and it serves a very useful purpose. So let's start with what we got in our vehicle, okay? That's another thing to be aware of. So I kind of broke this up into 2 sections, what I would call essentials versus optional, but still highly recommended, right? So some essentials: blanket, sleeping bag, jacket, at least 1 or 2 of those, if not all 3 if you can. That's very, very important. Even if you live in a place with a warmer climate, it still gets cold. Look what just happened, several years ago in Texas, where they had the ice storms and yada yada, and they knocked out all the power, and then people were dying in their own freaking homes because they didn't have those provisions that were necessary. They didn't have anything warm and extra stuff, and they just assumed that the heat would always be on in the wintertime and it would never get that cold and everything's all good, right? So same deal here. It's very possible that you might be driving at night, you might wreck your vehicle, and especially if you're somewhere where you don't have cell phone service, and you might be kind of further out in the boonies where cars aren't driving by so often to help you out. That's really important to have some things that you can take care of yourselves in the meantime until you are able to address that problem. First aid kit, trauma care, that's obviously should go without saying, but unfortunately not enough people carry that stuff in their vehicle, especially the trauma type stuff and some things that will address some larger emergencies, right? Bigger bleeding emergencies, things like that. I really highly encourage you guys to stock up on some of that stuff, and not only stock up on some of that stuff, but also educate yourself and take a class or 2 that will help you feel more confident on how to use those items. Take a first aid CPR class. I definitely recommend that. I will also link to a Mountain Man medical class, which is an incredible free trauma class educational course that you can take online that takes 2 to 3 hours. It's free and it's excellent. So I definitely recommend that. A little extra water does not hurt. Communication device, I absolutely consider that an essential. Again, whether that's a GPS unit that you can send out a text type thing, phone, right? A lot of people don't consider a phone an emergency device, but if something bad happens, then what's the first thing we always do, right? Call 911, get the cavalry here. So if we're able to, then especially if we're in service, why would you not want to have your phone with you? It's crazy, right? Jack, spare tire, jumper cables. I like to recommend people have a spare key so you don't lock yourself out of your vehicle. And if you do, you don't have to bust a window out, right? Have a little hide key. Jumper cables, that's a great idea, of course, if battery dies. And then it also doesn't hurt to have a tow rope. I think that's on my optional slide. Some sort of light, at least 1. And I would also recommend that you don't rely on the one on your phone, right? Sometimes we need that precious battery power. So I'd recommend a headlamp first, right? If not a handheld flashlight, those are always great. Headlamps are awesome because if you need to do something, if you're having to jack your tire up and switch that out, then you're able to go hands-free with the headlamp, right? And they're pretty cheap. You can get a nice headlamp for like 30 bucks. And then lastly, I also highly recommend you have some sort of phone charger, some sort of phone charging system. Optional, you guys can kind of read through some of those, right? But tow straps, a little bit extra food, maybe a way to make a fire, maybe a little bit of extra gas, fire extinguisher. Not a lot of people have those in their vehicles, but it's a great idea to have one. Knife or a multi-tool. A gun or some way to protect yourself is not a bad idea. Some bear spray maybe. TP, I definitely recommend you have some toilet paper in your vehicle. Ask me why that's a good idea. I've definitely had some personal experiences that were not ideal, so definitely throw some toilet paper in your vehicle. A tarp, that's not a bad idea either. Have a little protection from the elements if for some reason you need to get out of your vehicle and do something, or who knows, right? Sunscreen, sunglasses, maybe a little bug spray, right? So stock your vehicle up. You don't have to go buy all this stuff, at Walmart tomorrow or anything silly like that. Just accumulate over time and just make sure that you are always kind of working towards building out your inventory. And then of course also just keeping in mind and being aware of where that stuff is. And then for the love of God, don't forget that you have it there. And when you do need to use it, right? So I have that battery jumper on my optional slide. For those of you who don't know what those are, it's like jumper cables, but it's like a little box. I use them at like auto shops a lot. They're about the size of like a small suitcase, and they have 2 leads on them, and as long as you keep it charged up, if your battery dies on your vehicle, you can jump your car. I use those all the time. They're phenomenal. I have one in both my vehicles, and most of the time I use them helping out and jumping other people. Right, so if I just see somebody who's got their hood up and maybe their battery's dead, instead of having to pull my vehicle up and go head to head and do all that stupid stuff, I just pull up next to them, say, hey, do you need some help? And then I grab my battery jumper out of the back of the rig, and it's a 2-minute easy peasy job, right? So that's the cool thing too, where I'm using those things that I have in my vehicle, so I'm getting my money's worth, and also I'm kind of almost getting that practice in, right? And that's not a bad thing either, so. All right, different gear for different activities. This kind of goes without saying, but depending on what we're doing, we're probably gonna have some different stuff that we are gonna be utilizing, right? And so that's another thing, where as you get into these hobbies and you start getting in the works with people that do them, all that fun stuff, you start to see what it's kind of like that monkey see, monkey do thing, right? Where you see what they're using, and then you kind of get some other stuff, maybe a different brand, right? You get your own type thing, right? So that's a cool thing too, to just kind of be aware of what you need for each activity. Definitely bring things you think that you might not need. I've kind of been already hinting at that a few times today, but that's never a bad thing to have extra, right? And then again, I know I've been beating this dead horse a bunch, but also just know how to use your gear. I mean, it's really important. So the worst thing you can do is have all this cool Gucci stuff and spend $2,000 on all this fancy shit, and then you don't know how to use it. So next few slides, I just have a couple things for you guys to think about that, again, I think can translate to, a lot of these different types of activities that I would highly recommend you consider. This is called a Garmin inReach. They're pretty spendy, definitely worth the investment if you can afford it. 350 to 450 bucks plus a monthly fee. They do have a more simple, like an inReach Mini, which has less features, but it's still very phenomenal. And it's got some really cool features. So you've got your GPS map, so you can kind of see where you're going, all that cool stuff, track yourself, not get lost, right? But one of the best things is you can send emergency texts via satellite. So even if you're out of cell phone range, you can send emergency texts. You can have like preloaded emergency messages. And then it's got a button on there where if you're having an emergency, you press that button, hold it down or whatever it is. And again, they'll kind of send the cavalry out for you, right? So that's a really neat little item, especially if you do a lot of solo adventuring like I do. I don't have one of these yet, but honestly, I really should. I'll probably be picking one of these up pretty soon. So that's a great safety device to have. This is a cool little item, a little filter, water bottle, right? Water bottle with a built-in filter. There's a few different styles. I added this life straw. These are really cool. They're portable. They're great for emergencies as well, just in case you needed to use one, right? You could keep this in your vehicle, your little adventure vehicle, and then if for some reason you ran into an emergency and you didn't have any clean water, you know, and maybe you were stranded for a day or not even, maybe several hours, and you get thirsty and you don't have any water with you, well, if there's a water source nearby, at least you have a way to filter it. They're not very expensive, and the really cool thing about these is if you're doing like a day hike in the mountains or something like that and you know you're going to be near water, you don't even really need to, you know, fill your camel back up and do all that stuff. You can just run off this, and when you run a little bit low, as long as you've got a water source nearby, fill it up and suck it down, which is kind of cool. A tarp or a tarp tent, these are also awesome. So whenever I go backpacking or I go day hiking or whatever, I pretty much always have a folded up tarp in the bottom of my backpack that at least will cover my body, if not possibly myself and somebody else if we huddle up. That's mostly an emergency thing, a safety thing. If I either don't have my rain gear or I forget it, or it's raining so damn bad that my rain gear is not really quite sufficient, at least I have that tarp to keep that weather off me. Again, that can really be a huge savior. And then these little tarp tents are a great idea too. And this is, I don't have one of these yet. I got a few buddies that do. I'm absolutely going to be getting one very soon. Call it like a trekking pole tent tarp deal, and these are really cool. If you have your trekking poles with you, you can set it up as a shelter, so you can extend, you know, the length depending on how it's set up. Sometimes you extend one a little bit longer and then you have the other one a little bit shorter, and it creates this nice kind of tent shelter for you to keep all the weather off. And sometimes that's how we'll camp, just like that. Sometimes we'll even camp just our bivy sacks or just our sleeping bags, and we'll sleep outside and check out all the lovely stars. And if for some reason some nasty weather comes in, at least we have that. We can set that up real quick and dive under that. Another one, gaiters. This is a cool one that I never really used to use these until maybe 5 years ago or so. Now I consider them to be pretty much essential. So these keep things from getting in your boots, and also most importantly, they keep your pants dry. If you're hiking through snow, if it just rained and all the underbrush and the leaves and grass is all wet, right? So these are very, very nice pieces of gear that will really keep you nice and comfortable, keep you from being all soaked and nasty and getting your butt kicked by the elements. And then not only that, but if you get the right kind, not all of them do this, but some of them can also protect you against snakes. So snake gaiters are a cool thing too. They might also save your life because snakes are mean and nasty. Okay, so fanny pack, this is the last one. Just again, kind of a random piece of gear that I recommend. This is a cool little thing for people who, man, anything from day hiking, jogging, mountain biking, right? And just to have a few extra things on you, right? It doesn't take up a lot of room, not uncomfortable or anything like that, cheap. And again, you can just have some important things there. You can have a small, light jacket type thing in there. You can have some sort of defense tool, whether that's a firearm or some pepper spray, something of that nature. Flashlight, that's never a bad idea. Headlamp, and maybe a snack, something like that in there. So that's a really good thing to consider as well. Okay, so this is what me and my buddy woke up in, as I was saying before. This was in September when we were hiking up in our t-shirts, and it was all nice and beautiful. And then it hailed and sleeted and thunder snowed on us all night, and then we woke up to this. So while we're performing this activity, whatever it may be, it's a good idea to be monitoring kind of multiple things, right? So we need to be monitoring how we feel, how I feel, how my friends who are with me might feel. Make sure that people are feeling okay. If people aren't feeling okay, then that's something that we definitely need to be paying attention to and addressing. Keeping an eye on the weather and time, that's also very important, depending again on the activity, right? That's always a good thing. If you're out doing this big old daytime activity and you're not planning on staying the night out there, then you better be keeping track of time. And if you hike one way 3 hours, then how long is it probably going to take you to get back, right? So if you're not planning on staying the night out there, especially if you don't have any lights, then you better be keeping a good track on that time. Navigation, right? And even if you don't have that app that I was talking about where you can see the tracker exactly where you're going, it's still a good idea to be aware of the terrain that you're covering and where you are navigating. So even if you just have like an old school paper topo map, it's a great idea to be keeping an idea of your drainages and the topography so that you know where you're at the whole time so that you don't get lost. And that's another problem, another thing that happened with that hunter that passed away here, from what I understand, is that he got all turned around. Even though he was relatively experienced in hunting in this area, it was not his first time even hunting out there, but for whatever reason he got lost and turned around and wasn't able to make it back to his vehicle. So and then another thing that's very important is keeping track of your water and your food consumption and staying on top of that and not getting behind on that, right? So that's very important, especially out here, with the altitude, stuff like that, right? People can have altitude sickness all the time out here. Keeping track of food and water can play a role in helping that, staying on top of that stuff. Man, if you're diabetic, obviously that's crazy important. So just make sure that you stay on top of that stuff. And if you fall behind on some of that stuff, just maybe stop the activity, especially if it's a strenuous activity. Stop, take a break, and just eat a snack. I do that all the time when I'm out in the woods hiking steep stuff and doing all that craziness. Sometimes I just get wore out and I just have to stop and eat and relax for a little bit. Nothing wrong with that. All right, what if something goes wrong? So first thing that's most important is to remain as calm as possible. So I would say that's going to play a huge role in how well the situation is going to pan out. If you've ever noticed, like first responders, whether it's cops or firefighters or people on the ambulance, generally, if they're decent at their job, then even if this situation that you're finding yourself in is stressful and scary and you're freaking out, they're usually very calm and collected and cool because they've dealt with those scenarios a lot and they've trained up and learned and taught themselves that staying calm means that you're going to be able to handle the situation a lot better. You're going to think more clearly, and it's going to pan out a lot better, right? So if possible, remain calm, quickly, but not too quickly, assess what the problem is, figure out how serious things are, and then figure out what type of action we need to take, right? So in this case, this is a video that I would normally show in my in-person class. I won't here, especially because I'm already taking longer than I meant to originally. Okay, that's how it goes on these. But you guys can type in hunter, hunter accidentally sticks arrow and leg in YouTube or something like that, and this video should pop up. It's one of the top ones, and I'll link it in the description. But this is a great example of some guys who ended up dealing with a not cool emergency, some hunters that were out, and this guy ended up getting a broadhead in his leg, had a pretty good bleed there going, and these guys did a really good job of staying calm. Everyone kind of had their own role, and people were taking care of stuff. Nobody was freaking out, but they were also acting with purpose and intention, and they were acting quickly to address the problem and the emergency that they found themselves in. So that's a really great example. I highly recommend you guys check that one out. And again, I'll link that down below. Okay, so we're getting there. When do we call for help? So this is kind of a hard question to answer for people sometimes. People struggle with this one. I can sometimes kind of struggle with it as well. It's totally fine. It's perfectly natural. It's going to be different for some of us depending on how experienced we are and when we feel like we might need help. I tried to kind of add some examples here that I'll read off as far as when I would say it's a good idea to get some help. That would be serious bleeding, sprains, bad sprains, breaks, right? Especially depending on how far we are, maybe in the backcountry. Other medical emergencies such as bad allergic reactions, diabetic emergencies, seizures, serious altitude sickness. That's a really bad one, especially around here. I had a buddy's wife almost die from that. Heat stroke and dehydration, that's also a very serious one. Or if you're not able to diagnose the person's condition, but you can tell that it's severe, you can tell they're messed up. And generally, the way it goes with this stuff, I mean, if you're in doubt, it's better to call for help, get some help coming than not. It can be very expensive, unfortunately. here. You know, my buddy's wife who almost died from altitude sickness had to get airlifted out. That cost them like $20,000. It's ridiculous. But if they didn't do that, she'd be dead now. So, you know, it's kind of one of those things that it's a necessary evil. But again, if you are in doubt, I think it's just better to just get some help, do what you got to do, and deal with tomorrow's problems tomorrow, right? Now, that being said, just to wrap up here, on a lighter note, right? Hopefully this didn't get too dismal for you, but I do want people to encourage people to explore new hobbies. This is the latest hobby that I've been interested in, which is foraging for mushrooms. I love it. It's super fun. It gets me outside, gets me playing around in the mountains. I like finding things. I love foraging things, and of course I get to take home and eat them, and they're delicious. So it's a super cool hobby. Again, go out with people who are experienced. Hopefully you have some friends who are that way. If not, then, you know, put yourself out there and make some new friends, and make some new friends via those hobbies. That's always a cool thing. Figure out what you are and aren't comfortable with. There's nothing wrong with kind of establishing some boundaries, and there's nothing wrong with pushing some boundaries as long as it's done in a methodical fashion where you're not going too psycho, in my opinion. And then, of course, what this is all about, which is just to have fun. I go out in nature all the time because it tickles my soul. I absolutely love it. I feel very at home out in the woods when I'm interacting with wildlife and seeing the mountains and the streams and the Milky Way and shooting stars going across me. I mean, it's almost unexplainable. And of course, when I can do that with friends and people that I love and care about, it makes it even that much better. So get out there. We're not getting any younger, right? We only got so much time here, so get out here and explore and experience. These are just some resources that I would leave in the class that I teach here locally. So this is some kind of local information, but you can also kind of translate this to where you might live. And that might be something like your Parks and Wildlife, your Division of Wildlife, Forest Service, BLM, your BLM office. They can answer some questions that you might have a lot of the times. You might have like a sheriff's posse or search and rescue. Those guys are very knowledgeable, of course, because that's what they do, is they go out and they find people and save them when they get into sticky situations. So I would think that they would be willing to help you or answer some questions. Consider taking a wilderness first responder class, or as I said, take at least a basic first aid CPR class. That's very important. And then please stay tuned to me and what I got going on with urban and rural survival. I'm going to have more content like this coming out, more educational videos, and then of course on top of YouTube I've got Instagram and TikTok and all this social media fun stuff. So if you made it this far, you're awesome. I appreciate you. I hope that you enjoyed. As I said, I can tell my camera is being a little goofy with the focusing, so I do apologize about that, but I hope that you found the content helpful and useful. And I hope that you get out and explore the great outdoors.